For my Pecha, I will be discussing censorship in the context of Huck Finn and other major works of literature. Since the introduction of writing, we as a race have been trying to erase and edit. Some of the most common victims of this infringement on free speech are authors of controversial works. Let's begin with the definition of censorship. Censorship is defined by dictionary.com as the act of examining books, plays, news reports, motion pictures, radio and television programs, letters, cablegrams, etc., for the purpose of suppressing parts deemed objectionable on moral, political, military, or other grounds. Since its existence, censorship has been in question. The struggle for freedom of expression is as ancient as the history of censorship, and the struggle for freedom has throughout history been largely defined as a struggle against censorship. The 2012 list of banned books shown here is composed of some of the most controversial books of the last century, most notably The Grapes of Wrath, To Kill a Mockingbird, and The Great Gatsby. This is no surprise, seeing as their subject matter often conflicts with popular and established ideals of the time they are published. Some censorship is purely based on offensive or crude material that may be considered obscene or otherwise morally questionable. The other side of the coin has to do with the message that the book imparts. Often this is politically related. This occurs when governments hold back information from their citizens. This is often done to exert control over the populace and prevent free expression that might foment rebellion. The Grapes of Wrath, for instance, falls into this category. Quoted from NPR, when the book came out, some of the powers in the county where the story takes place thought that they had been portrayed unfairly. They felt that Steinbeck hadn't given them credit for the effort they were making to help the migrants. One member of the county board of supervisors denounced the book as libel and lie. The important pattern to keep in mind when addressing censored literature is hostile interpretation of the audience versus the intended consequences of the author. Often these two do not align, at least not completely or immediately. Steinbeck's goal with The Grapes of Wrath was to bring to attention the struggles of the working class population during the Dust Bowl and the government's inadequate support in alleviating their burdens. Of course, Huck Finn also follows the pattern. Twain's lurid descriptions of slave society are so far off the politically incorrect spectrum that it is too taboo to even write with the language he uses. Thus it comes as no surprise that his book should be banned from the reach of young and impressionable children. Shown here is a censored version of an excerpt from Huck Finn. Almost half of the page is blacked out and most of the content is lost. Twain's integrity and that of any author who finds him or herself the victim of censorship is compromised. His creative energy is staunched and the meaning of the text is drastically altered. The censoring of Huck Finn has become so widely acknowledged as preposterous, in spite of its annual throne in the Banned Books Hall of Fame, that there are a plethora of political cartoons in circulation mocking it. In this first cartoon, for instance, every single word in the conversation has been marked as inappropriate, sometimes for totally unjustified reasoning. This next cartoon highlights the ridiculousness of modifying the language of the characters. Not only is the vocabulary stuffy and inaccurate for the time period and economic status of the characters, but also it is nearly incomprehensible. Most notably in this cartoon is Huck's usage of the term African American James. It's pretentious and contrary to Huck's actual nature. Another novel that has commonly fallen victim to censorship is To Kill a Mockingbird. Written by Harper Lee, it depicts the story of Atticus, a lawyer who finds himself in the position of defending a black man, ironically also named Jim, in court. At the time, the book was not well received for its depiction of this white man defending a black quote-unquote criminal. Many schools refused to allow it in their libraries. Harper Lee responded to one in 1966 quite astutely, noting that if you don't get the message of the book, you surely cannot read because it is plain to the simplest of intelligence that it spells out in words of seldom more than 2 syllables a code of honor and conduct, Christian in its ethic, that is the heritage of all Southerners, and that the misconceptions are a problem of illiteracy, not Marxism. Again, we find ourselves in this position of hostile interpretation versus intended consequences. The public during this volatile civil rights era was not very welcoming of a novel that glorified the justice of blacks. However, Lee was obviously trying to manipulate public image of blacks as guilty until proven innocent. In this letter to the Flanning Committee for the Flagler Reads Together event, Lee emphasizes her purpose in writing the novel by stating, "I hope that the event becomes an annual one and that the book so chosen will bring together people of all backgrounds to share their experiences of life. When this happens, cultural barriers begin to come down and people discover that they are not so far apart after all." The problem is that the uncensored versions of books are the ones that best serve the author's purpose. Twain wrote an adventure novel from the point of view of a young, southern white boy to make Huck a relatable character. Therefore, his transition from parrot to man thinker, someone potentially on the path to believing in equal rights and abolition, serves as precedence for the indulgent readers of Twain's generation, who were themselves grappling with the very same issues. Nowadays, one might believe that such a reference is unnecessary, considering the fact that slavery is no longer legal in the United States. Even so, it is important not to lose track of our origins. Why do we read history books about the Holocaust or the Vietnam War? Because even if new generations don't have to experience the same tragedies of the past, it is a result of generations before them educating themselves of their ancestors' mistakes. And aside from just slavery, Huck Finn challenges tradition as a whole. There are many groups that find this disturbing, as a threat to their hegemony, which is based on the naivete of the populace. Huck Finn pushes the boundaries of conventional family values, individual responsibility in society, biblical sins such as lying and stealing, and of course, racial equality. Censorship is based on fear of change, of loss of control, of equality. However, if censorship had truly succeeded, we would not have been influenced by such prominent literature as The Grapes of Wrath, Huck Finn, and To Kill a Mockingbird. The direct connection that popular literature has to the public would have been severed, and then who knows how history would have turned out or what might not have transpired. For me, these books have had a monumental impact on my life. As an avid reader, they have marked moments of growth for me in my comprehension skills that exceed non-substantive books of my youth. These are books that I will read again and again because not only are they well written and absolute classics, but the message they impart is so packed with history and a sense of urgency that they have a timeless and moving effect on me and other readers alike.